The ambition of starting a league, how crazy that is. Why did I believe we could do it? And I think it's the athlete's mindset.
The co-founder and president of PLL.
He was a 10-time All-Star, won 2 championships.
We all dream of playing in a championship game in front of a sold-out crowd in overtime with the game on the line. You have to set those big, scary goals for yourself. Friction is incredibly valuable. Fall in love with that shit. It was one of the worst moments of my career. 2 weeks later, I broke my foot. I was in the dump. Why do we treat those who we've met for the first time with the utmost respect and those who we're closest with our worst selves?
What do you say to yourself when it's not going your way?
These are the moments that define champions.
Paul, it's awesome to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Ryan, I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Thanks, man. Let's go back to the summer going into your freshman year of high school. You're at a lacrosse camp at Loyola University, and at the end of the morning session, a legendary coach, Tony Seaman, speaks to the group. What did you learn from him that day from that talk?
Yeah, wow. So we're jumping right in. It's a great question. I'll always remember this day. I learned a really powerful lesson from Coach Seaman, who was one of the great college coaches of our era. He put us into a room, and we were all in 8th grade, all wanted to play at the college level, couldn't figure out, really the path to doing so, and he simplified it for us. But he first asked, he said, who here in this room wants to play college lacrosse? And everyone raised their hand. And then he asked, who here wants to get a full scholarship and play Division I lacrosse? And at the time, we were all like, whoa, would love to know the answer to that. Kept our hands up. He goes, okay, it's a simple recipe. Shoot 100 shots a day from this day forward through your senior year in high school, and I guarantee you will get a Division I scholarship to a college of your choice. 100 shots, that's reasonable. It'll take 30 minutes to do that. Really? Every single day? He's like, that's the key. You can't miss a day. If you miss a day, the guarantee is off the table. And that means we have to find time to get our 100 shots in on net when we don't have access to a net, when we're on holiday with our family, when it's raining outside, when there's a blizzard happening in the Northeast. You've got to find your way to a goal and get your 100 shots. He knew in the back of his mind that if someone has that level of commitment, you're going to get in alone because that commitment's rare. And if they're shooting 100 shots a day, you're going to become a phenomenally skilled player, no matter the discipline. Same thing goes for basketball, baseball, soccer, football. It is that ritual. It is that level of discipline and commitment. It is that underscored sense of passion and that determination, simplified in a really digestible way. Just get outside and shoot 100 balls a day. For anyone that sort of hears that, they go, okay, I can do that. And then the lesson in sport is, wow, this is a lot more difficult than I thought. But really, really critical that if you have the ambitions to be great at something, that you should set those goals and then act small, which means every single day you're doing the grind work such that you can build day over day, see something called compound interest begin to impact you as a performer, and the rest takes care of itself. There's no such thing as an overnight success. In business, it takes 10 years. With athletes, a lot of times 20. So you got to commit to the long term.
How do you think that applies off the field? So somebody who is a knowledge worker, or let's say they work at a Fortune 500 as a SVP of whatever, and so they're leading a team trying to hit ambitious goals, and they're like, okay, Paul, interesting, 100 shots a day, never miss, stay consistent. How would you relate that off the field?
So there's a company value that we have here at the Premier Lacrosse League. It's called Think Critically. And that value transfers over, I think, to the answer of your question, which is, what are your 100 shots? For me, the book, whether it's lacrosse, basketball, football, baseball, the different lessons that I share, they're all just metaphors for life. And the reason why there are a lot of Fortune 100 companies that recruit student athletes is the benefits of learning how to be a great teammate, work really hard, have the discipline and the commitment, the 100 shots a day mindset. That actually translates very well into the corporate world. It translates really well into relationships and personal growth and skill development. So the think critically component is, what are your 100 shots, right? So if you're a salesperson out there, what might your 100 shots be? Probably canvassing, probably thinking about calls in the morning, calls in the day, calls in the evening. You could take it a step further and hone in on your sales process by consuming from the greatest sales leaders in organizational history. If you're a basketball player, your 100 shots, pretty transferable. Same thing, football, soccer. However, I have gotten questions from defenders in lacrosse. They say, well, we're not really responsible for scoring goals, so what is our 100 shots? Right? And I think that has more to do with defending. So working on your footwork, working on your stick work, imagining offensive players coming at you and defending them. So it's all about your ability to say, okay, this is really about discipline and reps every single day. What are mine?
Yeah. It's like that compound effect, getting it started and keeping it going and going. It's like the unsexy part of excellence, I think, Paul, whereas it's doing it day after day after day. People want the hack. That is not a hack. That is something you got to do every day. And consistency, while not as sexy for a lot of people, is super effective and hard.
Yeah, you got to fall in love with the unsexy. The design on the cover of my book was intentional. And so it's an empty stadium, and there's a shot of me running stadium stairs, which any athlete can relate to. And it's painful, but you have to fall in love with the stadium stairs. The bigger message, though, is that we all dream of playing in a championship game in front of a sold-out crowd with the ball in our stick in overtime with the game on the line. But to get there requires endless hours in empty stadiums by yourself, honing in on your craft. And so it's not just routine based. Fall in love with that shit. That's the most important thing. And then you figure out the rest.
You mentioned goal setting, and you wrote in your book that most people don't set goals because the act alone is both a major and personal step in the direction of commitment, and it invites fear and the possibility of regret. I'm curious, what is your overall philosophy on goal setting?
Yeah, and I think that's probably been highlighted more and more in today's generation, where there's a lot of exposure and a lot of negative heat and trolling on social media for young kids. When I was growing up, as a NBA player, an NFL player, it was sort of the norm to say, I'm the best there is. I mean, Muhammad Ali would say it in boxing. It's part of professing to your passion, and it is also part of manifestation to your goals. Now, the other side of it is when you say you want to be the best or you are the best and you don't perform like the best in a game or get knocked off by your competitor, then you better be prepared to deal with the fallout. And the fallout is often not only a true test of our character and resilience, but will more regularly lead to greater opportunity, greater growth, and more success if handled appropriately. So I think, as we look at goal setting, for me, starts with a big dream, followed up by writing it down, followed up by sharing it. And it doesn't have to be with the world. Share it with yourself verbally, share it with your parents, your coach, your teammates. And frankly, if you receive criticism, it means you set a big goal, and that's a good thing.
Let's think about process-oriented goals versus outcome-based goals, because in your book, you also wrote about a story from John Wooden that he was 5'10", And so he was short for a basketball player. So he chose, you wrote that he said he was really good at focusing on what was within his control. You also write about this archery master, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Awa Kenzo, who focused on letting go of outcome. So this archery master would teach their students to pay no attention to the target. Success and failure come from the same place. So that's where the archer should point all of their attention, not on the outcome, but on the effort. So you're talking about outcome-based huge goals, like being an All-American or being a best-selling author or winning a championship. Not all of those are within your control, I would say. And some of that is focused as an archer, like on the target. So there's a little bit, I know this is nuanced, but I think it's worth talking about because I do see the power of setting huge, ambitious goals, but also not focusing on the target like the archer, or understanding what's within your control and what's not.
Totally. So in 2014, I was the captain of Team USA, coming off of an MVP of the prior World Championship games. And we were on the grand stage competing for a gold medal against Team Canada. I scored 0 goals, 0 assists. We lost. It was one of the worst moments of my professional athletic career. 2 weeks later, I broke my foot in the final stanza of the MLL season, and I was in the dump. I was depressed. I was feeling my identity, which at the time was in lacrosse. It wasn't in me as a human. And I checked into sports psychology. So I found a gentleman, his name's John Elliott, and he had worked with the San Francisco Giants and the San Antonio Spurs and Team USA basketball, and he was fabulous. I asked him this same question because I knew that I was very, very outcome focused, even though I could practice daily and work on the near term stuff, and I was present, and when I was present I was really dominant on the field. But if I didn't hit my statistical goals, my end of year goals, winning a championship, I was crushed. So outcomes, setting goals against outcomes is still important. So write those outcomes, those goals, those big goals down, fold up that piece of paper and go put it in storage. Lock it away. And then get into the present work. So the present work can get really granular, meaning we got to a place as a lacrosse player where I would focus on the release of my shot, not where the ball went. I would focus on, because the goalie could make the save, it could hit the post, everything gone well, but the outcome. So when I would come back to the sideline, it was, did I feel the ball release the way that it should, true and pure? Did I beat my defender the way that I needed to get that shot off? And really focusing almost exclusively on what I can control. So that is the day-to-day. That is how the best athletes who've maintained a level of presence on the floor, and Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, to those who have excelled in other disciplines, they still have the desire for the outcome, right? Like Larry Bird was so talented because he hated losing so fucking much. And he said it. It was his nightmare to lose, and he never wanted that feeling again, so he worked his ass off such that he could win. That's an outcome. So there is space for that. But knowing, okay, how to close the book on that, put it in the bookshelf, and then focus on your day-to-day and what you can control, that's the key ingredient.
Why do you think that big, ambitious, crazy goal, or others calling you crazy, is so important, in addition to obviously focusing on the daily process with what is within your control?
Well, I think if you can't dream it, you can't begin to plan against it, and you won't achieve it.
Yep.
So you have to, if you want to be the best, if you want to win championships, if you want to play professionally, if you want to play in college, you have to set those big, scary goals for yourself. Otherwise, you're kind of, shutting your eyes and working in a disorganized way. So I think absolutely, I encourage kids to dig deep. I reference in one of my chapters time spent with the #1 lacrosse recruit in the country in high school and asking him what his goals were. And he told me that he wanted to win a national championship. I asked him how many, and he looked at me like I was crazy. And he was like, more than one? I was like, why not four? And then I asked him how he wanted to play as a contributor to the team. He said, first team All-American. I said, how many times? Right? I asked him if he wanted to play pro. He said, yeah. I was like, when do you want to be drafted? First. So think about that stuff, right? That's motivation. We've got to have, a marathon runner knows that there's a finish line. And then she or he also knows every step is important, and their pace and their mindfulness during the, 2-hour period is critical to getting to the finish line, but you've got to mark your finish line.
I've read the Powerhouse book on CAA and became a fan of Michael Ovitz, even though he's a wild man and he's crazy. Maybe that's why I'm a fan of him. You wrote about an example of his outworking his opponent. I would love for you to share more about what you've learned from Michael Ovitz, this powerhouse agent who started his own company, and how he outworked his opponent to win.
Yeah. Ovitz is one of the premier entrepreneurs of our time, especially in film and television. So he started CAA. But he also, as a true entrepreneur, thought about solving for fragmentation in the industry. So he was the first to basically say, as an agency, we're going to represent the actors, the directors, the showrunners, the writers, and producers, such that we can package something and take it directly to a studio versus spend all of this laborious time trying to make a match. And by the way, it's better economics for us, and there's more transparency with our clients. So that was how he built CAA. He was always thinking outside of the box, which cut to this Allen & Co. conference he was at. He was having drinks with a few of the Coca-Cola executives, and they were just talking shop, principal to principal. And Michael was asking them what their biggest challenge is. And they felt at the time building unique marketing assets that got distributed on television was one that they couldn't figure out as the television era moved from broadcast to cable. So he said, if you don't mind me sharing, I think I have an idea. Instead of doing 4 spots a year, why don't you do 24? And they go, well, we couldn't afford it. And he was like, well, let me come back to you with some ideas. And they were like, let's take it a step further. Why don't we fly you out to Atlanta to meet with us? Little did they know that there was no advertising or consulting arm at CAA. They were just film and TV agents. So Michael went back to his team in LA and said, guys, I got us a pitch to win Coca-Cola's business from McCarran Erickson, and it's a $300 million plus a year account. And they all looked at him first with a little bit of a frown on their face. And they're like, we're movie agents. We don't do advertisements. We don't do spots and dots. And he was like, that's the wrong attitude. So he pulled his 6 best creatives. They got in a room and they really talked about, from a filmmaker's perspective, the right stories that Coca-Cola can share. That pitch turned into what the industry calls a shotgun pitch, where you actually sit in a room with your client and the competitor. So McCann Erickson was the huge advertising agency giant out of Madison Avenue in Manhattan. And they had owned this account, and they go, CAA is not going to do shit. So they showed up to the pitch morning of, right off a flight from New York, a little bit, shaggy as we all do when we get off flights and unprepared. Michael Ovitz and his team called the client, flew in a day before, got access to the room so they could feel the environment, rehearsed their pitch, went out for dinner, bought really nice suits so they could present in the same fashion that they see Madison Avenue often walk into these. They had their note cards and they were ready to go. And when the Coca-Cola clients flipped the coin to see who would go first, Michael Ovitz said, we'd like to go. And he didn't take the going second, which often human nature kind of says, let's see what the competition has and iterate. He was like, we're so prepared. These guys came off a flight. We're going to knock this out of the park and win through a level of creativity, execution, and intimidation. Anyway, that was their first consulting client, Coca-Cola. They won the business, and now CAA is one of the largest consulting arms of agencies across the advertising, film, television, and sports.
It's such an amazing story, but isn't it wild that people would take things for granted or not work that hard for a $300 million client, or to take them for granted and give somebody else an opportunity like that. And credit to Ovitz too for saying, yeah, we don't do this, but we're going to, and we can. It just isn't it surprising, Paul, especially the way you work and what you've done and accomplished, that people could just not do that. That's part of the story that blows my mind, is that these people could show up so ill prepared.
Yeah, I think complacency is a real thing.
Yeah.
And that story is shared to spark, an idea or a level of encouragement of thought to whatever it is that anyone here is listening is doing. So I'll give you the nearest analogy is sport. How many times do starters lose their position to an up-and-coming recruit or draftee that they didn't think was as good as them? Yep. Being able to maintain that never having won, never having achieved mindset is critical to longevity. Tom Brady accesses a level of competitive fire before every practice and game such that his senses are heightened. He can focus and execute like he did when he was the fourth string quarterback at the University of Michigan. Maintaining that mindset, that framework, will most certainly add to your success and longevity in whatever it is your career.
Jim Collins writes about this idea of being productively paranoid, and I found it to be a commonality among leaders and people who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time, Paul, I think, is the fact that regardless of what they've accomplished, whether it's a stand-up comedian that's got all the specials and movies that I've talked to, or somebody like you who's accomplished so much in their career, that regardless of any of that, they still have this productive paranoia about how they're going to prepare, how they're going to work, how they're going to show up for big moments, that no matter what, no matter how many mountains they've climbed, they're still going to be overly prepared for the next mountain, no matter what. And I think that's part of the inspiration that I see in your story, as well as the stories of the people you write about, is that they show up for that regardless of any of the past success they've had.
Yeah, I think about running, and I'll reference Usain Bolt, right? Where you're like, oh God, the greatest sprinter of our lifetime, he's tall and long, and that's why. A good running coach will actually tell you it's not about taking each step and reaching out as far as you can. It's actually how much force you can strike directly underneath you, and we're accelerating with our hamstrings and our glutes. You're not running with your quads. Those are the forward-leading muscles. You're striking right underneath you. What Usain Bolt could do is create a level of force and friction that propelled him further, faster than anyone in the world. Friction is incredibly valuable. That can come through paranoia. That can come through fear. That can come through, frankly, what I think a lot of the best executives and athletes have is a level of imposter syndrome. Now, that needs to be honed in and protected and not overly indulged with. And that's why, like, as you referenced Jim Collins, I reference Michael Dell in the book. And his mantra is be pleased, but never satisfied. Mm-hmm. And that's also what Doc John Elliott, my sports psychologist, told me. He's like, we could pursue the path of Michael Jordan, who I think is the greatest ever, and was so hard on himself and his teammates, and Larry Bird, who really, as we discussed, feared losing, and not losing was his objective. And he finished his career over the last 5 seasons with loads of back pain. Or you could be like Tim Duncan, who played until he was 40, won a lot of rings with Greg Popovich, and really enjoyed the moment while also having a little bit of that paranoia and fear that they would lose. So being pleased with your accomplishments is really important. Celebrate in the wins, the small ones and the large ones. Take your time to enjoy them, and also keep, I think 5 to 10% aware of competition, allowing that to drive you. Not too much, because then you're just competition focused versus focusing inward, and building a really close relationship with your fear and insecurities and your paranoia.
Speaking of that, I would love to go inside your mind. You're the best lacrosse player in the world and undisputed, and it's going well. Well, I mean, you're playing well, but what goes through your and your brother's, because I think your brother plays a huge role, as you write about in your book, and sounds like just an amazing dude. When you say, I think we can do it better. So much so that we're just going to start our own league. As an active player, as the active best player in the world, it's like Michael Jordan in his prime saying, the NBA's got some issues. I'm just going to start my own league. That's insane. I mean, that is crazy to think about, but that is legitimately what you did. So can you go back to the time in the middle of your career saying, nope, we're going to start our own league. We're going to find a way. We'll get money. We'll get investors. We're going to poach the best players. Like, we're going to do whatever we can. What was going through your head at that time?
Well, a lot. Mike and I often say that if pro lacrosse was working, we would have worked our way to buying a team, not building a new league. And I think if you reference Michael Jordan, or some people have suggested, like, what if, LeBron James, or we're seeing it in golf happen, but Tiger Woods has decided to stay with the PGA. What would happen if their leagues were underperforming? And so I think some of it is really taking a practical view on where you're at versus the rest of the world. So I was the best lacrosse player, getting paid at my peak $16,000 for the season. All of my income was generated in sponsorship dollars and running camps and clinics. This was barely enough to cover the costs of training and flying and operating, right? If Michael Jordan was in an NBA that was broken, which leads me to point 2, he may have gone in and tried to fix it, because the ambition of starting a league, how crazy that is, to your point, how challenging that is. I think back at, like, why did I believe we could do it? And I think it's the athlete's mindset.
Yeah. If
you're an athlete out there and you want to play at the highest level, you've got to be a little crazy. Because if you're looking at the data, it's the 1% of the 1%. And you've got to evade some things that don't have to do with you. Injury, the type of coach that you have access to, your teammates, the team's success. So a lot of it that's outside of your control. But if you have that ambition and you have that level of, like, unimpeded focus, then really, you can go dream about starting a league and try and start on that process. So I think it was a little bit of crazy, and there were some business fundamentals that we saw could be fixed. And then there was our process, right? We didn't just start a league from scratch. We first brought on investors and worked with the existing league to figure out a way where we could either partner or buy the existing league. Because I think you just don't want to walk in and break a bunch of eggs, right? You want to figure out via compromise and perspective and understanding the wider industry and the marketplace opportunity before you decide to totally disrupt. So those were the 3 things. And, look, there's the unexpected, which we were accustomed to as athletes, how we're going to react. And then there was the enormity of the task at hand, which, going back to what we discussed at the start, is a big idea. And every day we need to take the small steps to accomplish it.
What was part of your talk track to investors that, because you became a sales professional during, well, I mean, you still are, like, you have to be, like, sales is a part of all of our jobs, regardless of what we do, whether we have a quota or not. But when you're raising money for something and trying something very ambitious, you're selling constantly. What was a part of your pitch? What were those conversations like? How did you raise the money?
Understanding history of pro sports is important. There was this notion in professional lacrosse that as the game from a participatory college, women, international perspective continued to grow, that owning a pro team was like sitting on really expensive beachfront water property. And that as the sport grew, the pro game would. That's never happened. Not in basketball, football, baseball, golf. In fact, in all 4 of those sports, college was king for a long time, until you had really good professional operators that wanted to resource and invest, i.e. pour a lot of capital into their teams and the wider league. Sports are a requisite of a bottom-up trajectory. So the kids who are playing the game, their parents, their friends that are watching that are building up. And then at some point, the pro operators have to turn it into a top down where they're innovating, bringing on partnerships like ESPN and big brands like Ticketmaster and Gatorade and Adidas and Champion and Cash App. And you're telling a much wider story. So a tip of the cap to the David Stern era in the 80s that really reshaped professional basketball for the future. So understanding your past and being able to then say, look where we are. We're the native game to North America. We have 2.5 million participants. We've gone from 18 countries to 90 countries that are playing globally. So it's actually, why hasn't pro worked? Here's what we think we can do to make it work. And you paint a very clear picture. Look, we're not building slam ball. We're not, reinventing circuit training and calling it CrossFit. Like, this is a sport with history and product market fit. So here's our plan. Do you want to make that bet with us?
And how did it go initially?
I think, I think we surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that goes into the Michael Ovitz chapter a little bit, where you've got, the top athlete and his brother coming in saying that they can build a better mousetrap than the existing league operators. So people kind of go, we'll take the meeting, but rolling our eyes, and we come in fully prepared. My brother's got a serious entrepreneurial background and loves the nitty gritty of management and building. And so we turned that aspect contrary to how a lot of people view family members coming in and trying to disrupt an industry. And then we framed my construct of having played for most of my life and being one of the first athletes on social media, the first athlete to build a YouTube page, and understanding the future of attention and the future of media to our advantage. Neither of us had sports business experience from a league or team standpoint, but we each brought facets to the table that we knew and our investors knew were required to be good at sports ownership.
What's it like working to build something really tough with a loved one, with your brother?
Yeah, there's a chapter in my book called Mixing Family and Business, and a lot of people will tell you not to. Mm-hmm. We had investors pass because of their fear of a family business. We had investors ask to do a reference check with our parents. So that alone shows you that people, are looking at it in a way that they look at, don't discuss politics or religion at the dinner table. Right? What you do get with a family member is a level of loyalty and camaraderie and dependability that is really difficult to find with a co-founder who doesn't have a familial connection with you. It's just hard. Especially with something as difficult as building a sports league from scratch. The other thing that I'll share is when I transitioned from sports psychology to personal therapy, one of the things that I asked my therapist, who I reference in the book quite a bit, Lindsay Hoskins, I asked her this question that was very resonant for me in my relationships, which is, why do we treat those who we've met for the first time with the utmost respect and care, and those who we're closest with, family members and friends, sometimes with our worst selves? And, one of the things that I learned through those sessions was that people who we love and care for the most, who we actually feel the most safe in, and that's when our younger selves can come out. In addition to that, is in life, we're constantly searching for safety. And when we are in a state of fear, what our younger selves will do is actually lash out to those who we can depend on and love in hopes that they will respond and prove to us that they do love us and that we are safe. So that is some Freudian psychology around why we do what I was trying to investigate. So how do you go about not doing that with a loved one? And my brother and I spend a lot of time in therapy. We talk about communication quite a bit. We have our moments where we'll get upset with each other, or we can sense that our younger self is coming up and it has nothing to do with whatever it is we're discussing, a sponsorship deal or a lax product issue. So I think understanding that, and if you can you can resolve the threat of that, then you're far better off. The last note I'll leave on investors is, for founders who raise capital, especially venture capital, you're expected to be a steward of your shareholders. You're expected to put the company ahead of anything else. And when you're working with your family member, the reality is oftentimes they fear that you're going to put each other ahead of the company. And so I understand where they're coming from, but as we've discussed on this show, it's very possible for two things that might feel directly opposed to both be true, and all of us to be able to hold space for both things at the same time.
It's so much sweeter, though, when you get to achieve something great with a person you love, though, isn't it? Like, how cool is that?
It's amazing. And, you know, and in sport, there's a reason why you hear a lot of locker rooms close meetings with family on three, and why you hear a lot of athletes talk about, you know, the brothers in their locker room, is you create that family culture because you're a better performer when the stakes are higher and the people that you're playing with, you care more about.
Another performance psychologist you write about, Jim Lair, I may pronounce that wrong. This is a guy who's worked with some of the greatest athletes in the world. And I'm curious to personally learn more about the voice no one else hears. And so one of the questions that he had talked about was that people have this negative self-talk. And so he actually would put a microphone on people while they're performing or competing. And so he could listen, or it would be recorded. He could hear what they're saying, and he would tell them, hey, you know, say whatever is in your head. I want to hear the self-talk that you're going through. And I'd be curious, after studying all of that, what you learned from Jim and how that has helped you as a leader.
Yeah, it was a fabulous process that Jim implemented into the clients that he was working for. And you know, I think, you know, fortunately, because of books and podcasts and movies, we don't have to, you know, have the means to work with a Jim or a Doc John Elliott. And we can actually do this practice on our own. Mm-hmm. We can put our voice recorder onto our phone when we work out and listen to the way that we treat ourselves, especially when we're not playing well.
Yeah.
I would curse myself. I would lament in how I could have missed that. I always make that. And that is purely sitting in the past versus the optimal space as a performer in the present. The other side of it is sometimes we spend too much time in the future. You know, I would have this mindset when I was very outcome focused, is that, right, goals had worked for me up to this point. I'm now playing professionally. I want to go undefeated this season. I want to win a championship, and I want to score 3 goals and 3 assists a game. And then I would get into the detail of, well, there's 4 quarters. So I'm more likely, if I look at my record of playing, I'm more likely of getting 3 goals and 3 assists when I start off hot. So that means, you know, balls in my stick first quarter, I want to get to the net and put one in. And if I didn't, come the second quarter, I would be lamenting on why I didn't and playing catch up to that pace such that I could finish the game with 6 points and our team could win. And I was never really operating in a present moment or in a present state. So I think that understanding the way that our mind can take advantage of us, and then more importantly, building a relationship with it where we can talk back, is critical to defeating that enemy, our critical inner voice, and also cultivating and growing the part of the athlete that got us here, the optimist, the athlete who's ambitious, the athlete who believes that they can win every game, win a championship, and score 80 points in a season. Cultivate that voice as well. Oftentimes, you know, it does this where the negativity is the loudest in the room.
What do you say to yourself when it's not going your way, when you're having a bad day, when you got a big piece of adversity? What do you say to yourself? Yeah,
well, it's a reminder that you've, one, been here before. This isn't new.
You literally say, hey, Paul, you've been here before, man. Is that like you saying that? Or
you've been here before.
Been here before.
Number 2 is I've shot probably 25 to 35,000 times in my life. I am more skilled then the inner voice is telling me right now, and I have the ability to score this next shot. And frankly, I do on average. And then the third is more on background, but is something that anyone can develop. I call it rebound goals. You see it often in golf. I use the example in my book as going up and down. And someone like Phil Mickelson is the king of getting up and down, and all these miraculous shots he hits from the woods that land 2 feet from the pin, and he putts in and saves par, and everyone celebrates. That also means he had a really shitty tee shot. And in golf, I love that they celebrate the up and down. It means, how are you going to respond from a bad play? In team sports, you walk into games going, I better not have any bad plays. And when I do, things begin to crumble often. So what are your rebound goals? If you can develop a relationship with that, now all of a sudden I have a bad shot, as you had mentioned. I'm not only saying, how are you going to respond? But I'm going to say, these are the moments that define champions. Most people don't respond well, and it goes in the other direction. This is a great opportunity to get up and down.
These are the moments that define champions. That's really good. Thinking of that in the moment, because there's only a few certainties of life. One of the certainties is that adversity will strike, and your choice, our choice, is how will we respond. And to realize that these are opportunities for us, this is going to make the difference, right, between the ones who sustain excellence over time and the ones who don't, is how we choose. It's a choice, right? How we choose to respond when it's not going our way, when we're not feeling good, when we don't want to do it, when adversity strikes, when we miss a shot, when the referee makes a terrible call right outside of our control. Like, how will we choose to respond is really what it's all about.
Yeah, and frankly, create a mindset where you love being in that moment.
Yeah.
Now, I used to think about Michael Jordan's flu game, which we found out if we watched The Last Dance that it was actually food poisoning. But he was ill. And there's a part of MJ that was untold in that doc who had the mindset of, wow, what I'm going to do right now, feeling ill, with everyone in the arena knowing that, is going to absolutely stun the universe. And I'm going to actually appreciate this frame of both physical and emotional distress that I'm in. And I'm going to capitalize and do what people don't believe I can do. It's falling in love with the sound of an empty gym and dribbling against the hardwood, or no one being outside and you shooting and hitting the corner, and the tag of the net makes a extraordinary sound of music that keeps you going. Like, falling in love with that level of duress, such that, you know, if you can build a reactive habit, it's going to better serve you in games. Even zooming out, the biggest games in my career were losing the World Championship in 2014 and losing the National Championship my senior year in college in 2008. In both cases, I ended up responding the following season, and what I believe is having a way better career than I otherwise would have had I not faced that level of challenge and stress and sadness.
That's the difference, man. That's the difference between those who sustain excellence and those who don't. What's next, man? I got to believe you keep pushing your edges and setting bigger and bigger goals. What do you want to do?
Well, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier is the athlete mindset, fortunately and sometimes unfortunately from a workload, is that I follow my passion and interests, and I really work hard. So writing this book was an amazing challenge that was ignited by Ryan Holiday, who's a friend and investor in the PLL, who encouraged me to reflect on my career as an athlete and an entrepreneur in the form of lessons. Also was once on my podcast, where I've hosted the Steph Currys and the Triple H's and the Abby Wambachs and the Sue Bird. And he was just like, go into research, man. You love it. You're curious. and put together a guide for anyone out there who's looking to become great. Because the truth is there's no blueprint, but there are a lot of lessons, and certain lessons will resonate with us and become more relatable. So what am I going to do next? I wrote this book. I'm really focused on building the league into a top 5 team sports league in North America. I'm really focused on getting sticks in hands and goals on field across communities around the world. I love storytelling. I helped produce a documentary on the build of the league called Fate of a Sport. It's available on Hulu and ESPN+. I want to get into more scripted storytelling. These are things that I have no classical training in, things that are really hard, that I will be unsuccessful in, but I will utilize a lot of that technique that we've discussed to try to grow and ultimately pursue success in different things. But I know that my future is largely dependent on the small steps, the 100 shots every day. And much of my future is still unknown. I think all of ours is. And so if we have the patience and the wherewithal and the responsive techniques to pain, that really you can go do whatever you want. I believe that.
One of my favorite lessons from your book, there was a lot of them, by the way, but one of my favorites that resonated is the difference between self-promotion and passion. You write, I'm not going to convince you to like what I do. I'm going to show you how much I love what I do. It resonates so much, man, because I feel very fortunate to do what I love to do, and I hope, and I could sense it from you, like that is so evident just in your being. You don't have to say it. You just show up and do what you do, and it's so evident that you love what you do. And I think that's one that I hope resonates with lots of people, that they get the opportunity, that they don't have to feel like they're self-promoting. They're just showing up and doing what they love, and it's just so evident from the outside, those viewing, like, wow, Paul's doing what he loves, man. Like, I can get behind that. And I'm guessing that's a big part of the sales process too. We don't have to get into it, but it's like this guy loves it. And that's what's evident when you see what you do.
Yeah. And to open this up to the next generation that really lean into show, don't tell, is this is show and share. Because, leave all the criticism and social media trolling aside. Like, sharing our passion is a part of our human gene code. Like being able to communicate and connect with others and build community around shared interests and passions. That's how tribes were formed and continued to evolve as Homo sapiens. And so there is a line though between telling people to love what you do or telling people to come watch me versus just going and doing it and sharing it. Rick Rubin talks about it in his book quite a bit, The Creative Act. And the best thing we can do as artists or athletes is to put our best selves and our best product out there. Let go of any outcome. Don't create a book that you think other people need or will want. Create a book that you care about, that you love, that speaks to you. And I always wrote notes. I always sort of studied other athletes and entrepreneurs, entertainers, and tried to pull from them. I fancy myself more of a chemist, not an inventor.
Yeah.
And through that lens, I have been able to evolve and grow, and I'll always maintain that. And a lot of those lessons that I've learned are in this book.
So good, man. So good. I highly recommend it. It's called The Way of the Champion: Pain, Persistence, and the Path Forward. We got to like 6% of the notes that I have for this book. So highly recommend people get it, read it, implement it, and there will definitely be so many lessons, some short, some longer, that will resonate. So Paul, thank you so much for doing it and for writing it. Thank you for being here today. And I would love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man. Likewise. I really enjoyed the conversation. And the last note I'll leave your audience with is, you and I, who spend a lot of our professional time communicating, we have different research techniques. I guarantee it. We have different preparation processes, and we even probably take our product through a different form of post-production. Not one is better
than the other or right and the other wrong. And I hope that this book can provide a range of lessons such that you don't feel, oh, I can't identify with that, therefore I turn the page. And I'll give you an example is, I often think two of the best footballers of all time are Tom Brady and Pele. And they both prepared for games totally differently. Pele would meditate, put a cold towel over his eyes, visualize, try to calm his heart rate. And Tom Brady got his heart rate up. And he wanted to develop a level of hate and aggression against his competitor. One won 7 Super Bowls, the other one 3 World Cups. Their preparation mindfully is totally different, right? And the book will contain, hopefully, a range of things like preparation and execution and strategy, such that we learn that we're really connected and we all really care, and in some cases are on the same team about the future of society, the future of sport, and the future of our relationships.
Love it, man. So well said. Really appreciate it again, man. Look forward to the next time we get to talk. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ryan.